All right, well, excellent. Welcome everyone to the SPI program webinar. My name's Grant Price. I'm the head guide for Blue Ridge Mountain Guides, and I'm going to be moderating this evening. With me, I've got a few providers of the SPI program from various organizations and throughout the country. I'm going to let them introduce themselves when they do their first questions in a little bit, but I do want to really thank them for being here this evening, volunteering their time and expertise. So the intended audience for this webinar is really anyone with interest in the SPI program. That could be someone looking to get into climbing instruction, someone that's taken the course and is preparing for the assessment, or maybe you don't have professional aspirations and you just want to take your recreational skills further. I think this course can certainly offer a degree of that. Or we may have some folks with us that have no interest in facilitating climbing, but are going out with climbing instructors and are interested in what the training and examination process is like there. So with that, welcome again. We're going to go through a little introduction to the SPI programs, and then we'll turn it over to questions for everyone. All right, so the single pitch instructor program has a quite broad learning objective of proficiently facilitating and instructing the sport of rock climbing in a single pitch setting. That's quite a lot to cover in a 3-day course, and then have folks take that information, polish it, and then demonstrate proficiency in an assessment and be ready to go out and work with the public. Before we go further into the SPI program, let's talk just briefly about the AMGA. So the organization was formed in '79. It was originally the American Professional Mountain Guides Association, and then the first few years the P was dropped, and it was largely forged to legitimize the trade of guiding and unite guides to take things further. Another significant date was '97, when the organization was inducted into the IFMGA, or the International Federation of Mountain Guide Associations. This is the global organization for mountain guide associations. And of all the climbing organizations in the US, the AMGA is the only one receiving that recognition. So what makes up the AMGA programs? We really have two realms: the instructor programs and then the guide track programs. So within the instructor programs, we have the climbing wall instructor, which has a focus on artificial structures. The single pitch instructor being the baseline of outdoor rock instruction. And then formerly, we've had the rock instructor program, which has now been converted over to the multi-pitch instructor. Then the guide programs, beyond rock, we have two additional mediums there, alpine and ski. And really what sets these two realms apart is that the instructor is going to be doing some guiding, but oftentimes working in higher ratios with much more of an education focus. Whereas guides are going to be in bigger terrain, probably moving through more of it, and lower ratios, 1:2 generally, or 1:4 maybe for ski. So a breakdown of the CWI program and the SPI program. One distinction between these two is just that the climbing wall instructor program has an assessment built into the 2.5-day course. And with that, you can choose to do a top rope or a lead assessment. So it somewhat meets you where you're at with your indoor climbing skills. We'll talk more about the SPI here in a moment, but then the multi-pitch instructor program, pretty new. Just kind of the highlights of that, you're going to go through the SPI Course and Assessment, then the 10-day rock guide course, and then an 8-day multi-pitch instructor course and exam. These are the guide tracks. The one program that's not listed here is the Alpine Skills course. What that does is provide a starting point for someone wanting to go into the alpine, ski, or both of those disciplines without being a rock climber. Otherwise, if you plan to go through all of these, you'd want to start with the rock guide course. 86 days of training just on this chart. Once you add in your medical credential, wilderness first responder at minimum, and then your avalanche training, you're going well over 100 days. So quite a investment there. So while on a SPI course, what to expect, there's a lot. The program's made up of 19 sessions of content and then a review session. And some of the major focuses are certainly technical skills and risk management. Those are largely intertwined. Interpersonal skills and professionalism. Got some video of just some programs that I was on in the last year. This was at Pilot Mountain in North Carolina.
SPI course at Pilot Mountain, Blue Ridge Mountain Guides.
Anchoring is, of course, a huge part of climbing. And on day 3 of this program, the participants are putting that into application and getting some guided feedback. They're building a top rope anchor and then transitioning to the base of the cliff to be able to manage the climb from there. Top sites, having the ability to either climb to the top of a route and then belay at the top, facilitate a rappel, or come into the top of a cliff really gives you the ability to operate in a lot of different terrain. Here, this participant is managing a belayed releasable rappel to facilitate rappelling for the first time for someone. Base sites, just the way we're describing top rope climbing from the bottom of the cliff, something that we do quite a bit of. I'm going to skip that video and then just go right into leading. One of the unique things with the SPI program is it has a lead component, and this opens up quite a bit of terrain, being able to start at the ground and work your way up. This is at Crowder's Mountain in North Carolina. Someone recertifying their SPI certification on a assessment. Pretty phenomenal fall colors there. Another aspect of the course is rescue and assistance skills for when things maybe don't go as planned, and also for just enhancing someone's experience out climbing, maybe being able to give them some assistance on a specific route. Here, folks are practicing a belay takeover, a counterbalance ascent, and then a counterbalance rappel. Beyond the technical skills, professionalism is a huge focus. This is really what differentiates the climbing instructor from just someone taking out their friends or family climbing. Beyond that, professional topics, permits, insurance, liability of all this, programming, and risk management plans. Coming out of this course, we want folks to be familiar enough to be able to go and work somewhere and have their head wrapped around these topics, or potentially be able to ask the right questions if they're looking to be managing a program. So one word to sum all this up for me as versatility. The SPI program, I think, does a phenomenal job of equipping folks with the skills they need to be able to facilitate climbing all across the country. Sets you up to be able to work in Maine at the sea cliffs where you can't get to the bottom of the cliff. It's just ocean, doing top sites. It prepares you to be at the Red River Gorge where most of the routes need to be accessed by leading, or maybe out in Red Rock in Nevada where you can get to the top of the cliff or go into the bottom. I know for me, the SPI program has been a phenomenal foundation for my guiding career. And yeah, looking back on it, again, I think versatility is really what it provides you with. So with that, we'll jump into some questions. Beyond this session, please feel free to reach out to myself, and then I'm sure the folks in our panel will be happy to help you with questions as well. And some online resources you can find, the SPI program handbook. This is a PDF format. You can download it for free. Most providers are going to have it on their website. There's a link on the BRMG site there. And we go into a little bit of what to practice before a course on our page. And then in addition to the handbook is a separate publication, the manual, authored by Bob Gaines, Jason Martin. Phenomenal book. This is provided on SPI programs where you can find a copy off of Amazon. Just a wealth of knowledge in there. So with that, let's start taking some questions. If you are an attendee, you can go down to the bottom of your page and there'll be a Q&A link. I'm going to start accessing those and sending questions out to folks. At this point, it doesn't look like we've got any questions. So we'll wait for some of those to come in, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute the panelist and then just start having some discussion. Folks want to add on to just the program description I gave there, we can do that.
Yeah, sure, Grant. This is Ron Funderburk. For the attendees, I'm the Director of Education at the Colorado Mountain School and an SPI provider trainer, and former discipline coordinator of the program. You mentioned it. I would just reemphasize that in 27 hours and 3 days of training, it's kind of impossible for you to learn to be a single pitch instructor. So part of the journey of becoming a single pitch instructor is what you do after your course, the recommendations from your provider, how you go practice, how you go train, how you apply the feedback that you got during that program, and how you seek more feedback, so that on the day when you arrive to take your assessment, you're really giving a demonstration of your skill set.
Nice. All right. So we've got some questions here. This first one I'm going to direct to Aziza. When do you need to recertify for SPI, and how is that affected by more AMGA credentials?
Yeah, full disclosure, I'm an assistant provider in the pool, so I still have a lot to learn about like the ins and outs of the program. So if I say something that's incorrect, I hope that one of the more senior providers will jump in and correct me. I'll do a little intro first just to kind of go along with what Ron was doing so you know who I am. My name is Aziza. I use she, her pronouns, and I used to work with Ron at the American Alpine Club. So when he left us, I became the education manager there somewhat recently. And I'm also a part-time guide and climbing instructor with Denver Mountain Guiding. So I live out here in Boulder, Colorado. And like I said, I'm sort of going through the process of becoming a provider. So currently I'm an assistant provider in the SPI pool, which means that I have to co-teach with a full provider in order to provide programs. But to answer your question, the certification lapses every 3 years. But if you take another AMGA program before that time period, then it sort of gives you extra time to, it like re-ups you basically. So once you've taken that assessment, and if you're about to expire but you took a rock guide course or a higher level of training, then that would essentially renew your certification.
Excellent. All right, so the next question is it recommended that people take time between the course and assessment? Is there a time limit that you have to take after the course prior to doing the assessment? Would anybody like to field that one?
I can share.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So there is not a prescribed time or a necessary time for every single person. It's going to depend a lot on what your skill set is coming into the course. That said, I think you'll find at the end of a course, you're typically going to have a conversation with your instructor, with your provider, where you'll set a time frame. A lot of folks tend to be in the 3 to 6 month time frame in my experience. I think less than that requires you to be super front loaded. And longer than that probably means that you maybe weren't up to speed with all of the prereqs before the course for some folks. Obviously, there's a lot of range there. It depends how much you're getting out. Are you actively working? If you're actively working, then you're going to be able to work on those skills a lot faster than someone who's just practicing on the weekends.
All right, next question. What are the expectations post COVID-19 for instructors? What does the AMGA anticipate the landscape will be like? You can say this is certainly a tricky one that don't know that we'll be able to do a whole lot more than speculate on, but I'll open it up to the floor.
Yeah, so my name is Director Bruin. I am an outdoor educator in Ogden, Utah. I work at Weber State University, also guide for myself independently. But as far as the AMGA stance goes, recently the AMGA office released a statement basically to the effect that you have, I'm trying to think, an additional 6 months or something if your certification lapses during this time of sort of lockdowns and not going out to guide to recertify. But for more clear direction on that, the best place would be to contact Andrew Megas-Russell, who's the manages the SPI program in the AMGA national office for the clear direction there. As for the rest of the landscape after that, I guess it really just depends on when we start moving back to less social distancing or what that might look like. But I could imagine a variety of scenarios where single pitch instructors could continue to work at less popular venues with smaller client groups or something like that. But as far as when that happens, I think that's kind of anyone's guess at the moment.
And just Grant, can I realized I didn't introduce myself at all before I started rambling last time. So my name is Sean, I'm based in DC. I'm a rock instructor and a single pitch instructor provider. I use they, them pronouns. And one of kind of a little bit of an odd duck in the sense that I've spanned the gym and outdoor guiding worlds. I'm a gym director and we have an outdoor school that I manage as well. And that's where we guide and teach, run the SPI group program through. So that's my background.
Awesome. This is great. We've got lots of questions coming in. Next one is, what's the best way to prep for the exam?
I would just, I would echo what Sean was saying. Like, it really depends who you are and where you're coming from. But I was actively working right after leading up to my SPI course and until my exam. And that was just like invaluable experience because there's so many things that you cover in that course that you just don't really do in a recreational context because of the type of skills that you're being taught. I think a lot of people enter that course thinking they're going to learn how to trad climb. And that's really not what the course is. You're really learning to like take people out in a professional context. So as much as you can spend time in that professional context, or as realistic as like close to reality as you can get to that. So if you have friends who genuinely like just don't know how to climb, that's going to be a lot more valuable experience than pretending with one of your friends who is a very competent climber. So as close as you can get to truly instructing somebody, I think that experience will prepare you as much as you can be.
I also might add that if you're going to go out and practice, you should do so intentionally. It can be really easy when you're going out with friends, especially if they have some experience, to kind of just bail on the plan and to say, oh, well, I know I was going to run this top site, but the stance is kind of cramped and it doesn't sound like very much fun. And so we're just not going to do that. And that's a really great way to hamstring yourself. If you intended to go spend a day practicing, you should spend that day practicing, which might not actually involve very much climbing. It might involve you doing things like driving to the crag and paying for the gas and buying dinner at the end of the day and carrying all the heavy gear to convince your friends to let you have them play client for a while.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant question. Does anybody else have thoughts on that?
I'll jump in and add one more thing. Not everybody gets this experience, obviously, but I was really lucky to have like incredible mentors when I was getting ready for my assessment. And I had people who were certified SPIs and beyond, like were really skilled instructors. And obviously not everybody's gonna be able to find that, but if you can find that person in your life, like just getting a different perspective, because you'll hear one thing from one SPI provider, but that's not necessarily going to be consistent across the board. Like everybody has their own style and their own way of doing things, and the more inputs you can get and the more feedback you can get and see what other people do, it can be overwhelming, but it can also be really helpful because you might understand it a little bit better just hearing it a different way or seeing it a different way.
That's also raises a good point that the AMGA does have an unofficial mentoring program. You can find the AMGA mentoring unofficial Facebook group if you just search for that. You do have to be a current AMGA member to join. So that means you have to have taken an SPI course, but there are plenty of places and opportunities there where folks will run mentoring skills days in your local area, or also places you can meet up with other folks who are in the same boat as you who want to go do exam prep. That sort of thing. So it can be a way to build that network as well.
Thanks. Okay, so our next question is, what is the scope of practice for an SPI? Is supervision required, or are you able to work independently?
I could chime in on that one. The scope of practice is pretty clear, but based on those terrain designations of single pitch. So as long as there's no intermediate belay and no difficulties posed by approach or descent, you can work independently. Now just remember all the things that you'll learn from your course about professionalism, about being permitted and appropriately insured, and when you start working independently. But there's nothing in your scope of practice that says you cannot work independently, as long as you're working in single pitch terrain.
Also included in the scope of practice, single pitch instructors can guide base site ice. I have to dig the document up, but if under direct supervision of someone who can supervise alpine terrain, you could potentially work as an SPI guiding like ice top roping with no leading as well. If you want to find the full scope, you can also just Google AMGA scope of practice, and it'll come right up on the AMGA website.
And something to add to that, once you have completed the SPI course, you can also work under supervision in single pitch train from an SPI or higher. Kind of going back to how to prep for the assessment, that can be a really good avenue. If you do the course, maybe seek out opportunities with organizations that might allow you to shadow or be an assistant guide.
One more clarification about that scope of practice. We're talking about outdoor single pitch terrain. Your single pitch training doesn't really equip you to work at an indoor climbing facility. And I'm sure Sean can tell us, like, the proficiencies of an indoor employee are not emphasized in a single pitch instructor course or assessment.
Totally. There's a hugely different range of skill sets you have to be comfortable with. There's a hugely different population you're working with. The style, the level of control you have, it's a totally different environment. You're really risk management and crowd control in a gym in a way that is not the same as professional guiding and instruction, where people are there to listen to you. So those are super complementary skill sets, but definitely don't go together.
All right, our next question is, how much time typically passes from starting the certification process and completing those 100+ days that you had mentioned? So this is more so about the guide track program. Anybody want to throw out some general numbers on, like, people going from start to finish with the IFMGA pin? Who's done it the fastest?
It just varies so much. It's like all across the board. I mean, I feel like some people have completed it in just a few years, and then there are people who have taken like over a decade. I don't know. People probably have more specific numbers than that, but
I think the fastest you can get through the program is 3 years if you pace everything just right, get on every course or exam you apply for, meet all the prerequisites along the way, and more or less have already done all the climbing prereqs and skiing prereqs before you get there. But it's, yeah, like 3 or 4 years minimum.
and have amassed a small fortune in the process.
Yeah, right.
Okay, great question on first aid skills. What are some of the first aid skills needed for an SPI?
It's a little bit open. It's appropriate for your terrain. The wilderness first responder is certainly a great option. I think should be kind of the gold standard. And if you are looking to progress inside the AMGA and take higher level courses, that's what you're going to want. That's what you're going to need. That said, wilderness first aid, you can get more direct, and partially it's because the terrain that single pitch instructors can guide in can vary super dramatically from literal drive up roadside access to longer hikes, more not backcountry, but slightly more areas which would present more difficulties in a rescue or in an injury or an emergency. So yeah, the wilderness first responder is definitely the gold standard. Wilderness first aid is a great option as well, and that's a much shorter certification.
To highlight that too, I think exactly what Sean's saying. And if you're only working like in town crags where you're, hop and a skip from the hospital and you don't even have to get in the car, basically, like it could be just first aid and CPR. Like it's kind of one of the nice things about the way it's phrased in the certification standard is it really just depends where you're working. And the AMGA does give you a lot of leeway to decide what is a responsible level of certification in first aid or first aid training.
All right, so the next question is on mentorship opportunities. What kind of mentorship opportunities are available on the SPI level?
I think the group Derek mentioned is a really good resource. If nobody comes to mind, and on that page, there are also some really good resources about connecting with people in your area and how you might do that. If you know of somebody who works in your area who you really respect or have a good relationship with, and you think they would be a good fit as a mentor, there's some really good resources on that page about how to do that well. I think a lot of us sort of just think like, oh, well, I'll just ask them if they want to help me and then see where it goes. But you can actually be a lot more proactive. And the more proactive you can be in a mentorship relationship, the more likely you are to be successful with it.
As far as regional events, I can speak to a few that have happened recently on the East Coast. I think last fall, there was one in the Gunks that incorporated single pitch instructors. And then I believe Fox Mountain Guides did one in North Carolina that Carson DeLapp ran. And then unfortunately this year it was impacted by COVID-19, but usually one in Ragged Mountains, around like Massachusetts area that Matt Shove organizes. So keep an eye out for those. The Facebook page is the best way to get that information.
I would also say reach out to local guiding businesses, ask if you can shadow or assist. I've definitely had people who are not necessarily looking to work for me, but were looking to prep for an exam, who came and helped out with courses just to have that time watching other instructors work. It's not something that all companies are going to be willing to do. It's definitely a request and it's extra work for that instructor and for the service overall. But that can definitely be a way to get some time under somebody's wing and see how different businesses operate. You can kind of you can learn a lot from the variation between different instructors and different services.
Echoing some of those sentiments as well, I'd say that if you can access mentoring days in your area that are like organized events, that's great. And if you can't, understand that it can be a really big request to go get mentoring from someone, particularly if there's not already a pre-existing work relationship, because you're in many ways asking them to go work for free. And so it is helpful in building that relationship by sort of demonstrating that you've been proactive, which is to say that you're like, hey, I have really specific questions about these things. Like, I've been practicing this and this, and I'm running into snags here. Or like, I've really been trying to build a lesson plan to do, whatever it is. How can I improve that? Like, those things show that you've been putting in work on the front end, and it makes it more likely that you're going to find someone who's willing to say, like, oh, you're already doing the work. You're dedicated to this. I'm willing to invest some time in you. It's a lot harder to get folks to invest time in you if it doesn't appear that you've put in that work on the front end either.
All right, so next question is about being belayed with the folks that we take out climbing. What's the standard practice with being belayed by clients? Pretty common question. I get this really regularly. Do you want to speak to this one?
I'd love to start this one because it's and I'd love to hear from Adam Fox as well, because it's an answer that has evolved over time. I think the use of an assisted braking device to me has just continued to reveal itself over and over and over again as a powerful risk management option. And when I started providing climbing instruction, I had to teach people how to give me a lead belay with a gree-gree if I wanted that as an option, which was a cumbersome and time-consuming process to get them to give me an effective lead belay with a gree-gree. So I would often default to a manual braking device because it was simply easier to teach. But then I lost that margin of error, that backup that's intrinsic within an assisted braking tool. thankfully nowadays that market has just diversified so much. There are so many options where you can take an assisted braking tool like an ATC Pilot, all the iterations from Edelrid. They're just really easy to teach someone to use. And then, you know, I think I can very rapidly train someone to give me a lead belay, have confidence that if I fall, they will catch me. And I pass those lessons along to my SPI students, and I would pass them along to you as well. I wouldn't hesitate to have a student belay me, but I need to teach them how to lead belay first.
Yeah, you know, Adam, being with the program for possibly longer periods of all of us, do you have any thoughts on how that has changed over time with what Ron said?
I don't know if it's changed that much, really, has it? I know it's kind of hard with a bit of a break in what I've been doing, but it was all about, mainly about making sure the client or your student could be like coaching, modeling, you know, things like that, I guess, and just, yeah, I don't really think it's changed that much, has it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, no, the core elements of what you're saying are the same, like that the instructor needs adequate security. That means that they need to teach someone how to give a lead belay, that the belayer can't be a hazard to the instructor, that the belayer has a secure place to stand, that they've become an adequate counterweight. All that's the same. But I think that the fact that the assisted braking device market has changed so much, there's so many new options, that's just given the SPI tools that they didn't have when the program was launched in 2008.
Mm.
If I may share an Adam Fox story. No. So, no, Adam was present in my early climbing and instructing career, and at the time, I think there was a notion that if you had a student or a client belaying you, then you could basically consider yourself to be soloing, with the added risk that this person would rip you off the route by short roping you. And I remember you sort of laying this out and then basically saying that, but if you're a good instructor, you should be able to teach them how to belay, in which case you're no longer soloing. And perhaps I think that gets to the heart of the matter. It's just that if we're good instructors, we should probably be able to teach people to belay competently in the first place. And that's something you said that sort of always stuck with me.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of an adage, just a classic little joke, but people all the time would say, I'm always soloing when I'm guiding, and my retort would always be, well, then that means you're a terrible instructor if you can't teach them to belay. You know, that was all, you know, yeah. It's pretty basic, you know, thing we're here to do is to teach people to belay. And so if you think you're soloing, then you're a terrible instructor, you know.
I feel like people ask this question a lot too, and I just want to validate something that I feel like underlies it, which is that teaching people that is really hard. Like, teaching all of these skills can be really challenging, and it is one of the harder things because there's all of this time pressure, and you want to get people climbing right at the beginning of the day, and so it does take a lot of practice to get really good at this skill. But I would definitely echo like what everybody's saying, like that's kind of why you're there, right? Like, you're kind of there to like hone your instructional craft and like do this really well. So you'll mess some things up and like probably put yourself in somewhat sketchy situations a few times, but over time you'll figure it out. And just one other thing I want to add too is, this is maybe a little bit semantic, but I would say that what we're describing is honestly not standard practice necessarily. Like, you will see a lot of people, a lot of certified people who very much still ascribe to the idea that Derek was describing of, when I'm guiding, when I'm teaching, when I'm out working, I'm soloing. So I just want you to prepare you for the fact that like you will see people doing that, and that's like a totally normal thing within this industry and the AMGA and outside of it. But that I hope that if you choose to take an SPI course or assessment, that's one thing that you get out of it, is that it doesn't need to be that way. And yeah, that really is bad instruction and bad risk management all around.
I will, just to kind of, at the risk of getting way off into the weeds over here, I think that there's also an important difference between being able to teach someone to belay adequately and effectively in a fairly quick period of time, and relying always on your client to belay you. I think you also get really good at figuring ways to avoid having someone belay you, or to have them belay you but not lower you. And those are all skills that oftentimes come up in SPI courses, and I think are definitely germane to the SPI. So getting really good at not having, training someone to belay you. Not everyone can learn at the pace that you can teach or that you might need them to be able to belay you. And especially for things like lowering, where you're actually relying on them to hold your weight, that's the thing you can avoid with technical skills.
And I think it's also worth pointing out too that lead climbing, belaying, these topics are both addressed pretty exhaustively in the course as well. So there are solutions to this problem or ways to mitigate, right? So part of that is your ability to teach. Part of it is gauging your students' confidence. Part of it is your terrain selection. Are you on-siting? Are you on routes you've done before? Is there a way to facilitate some mock lead belaying in advance? Can you avoid leading all of them together by going to the top? Can you use an assisted braking device? Can you use a backup belayer or a ground anchor? So there's a lot of options for that. So I would say that as far as like a standard practice, I think there's a lot of tools you can employ, but it's going to vary enough situationally that to say there's like a single standard might be a bit too definitive.
Which, if you haven't already taken an SPI course, be prepared to hear that a lot. Like, there's rarely an answer.
All right, so we've got 2 more questions on the queue here, and around 18 minutes. And I think these 2 may fill that time pretty well. The first one is, what are the main reasons that people have not passed assessments?
I think each examiner here could probably give a different summary, but if I could just make a broad brushstroke here, the biggest pattern I see is I see candidates who haven't considered all 9 categories of proficiency. They've looked very closely at their technical skills. They've practiced their knots and hitches and maybe anchor building, but they haven't diversified those skills enough to be proficient in the application category. Even if they've worked in the application category, maybe they haven't actually done much mock instruction or instruction, so they aren't doing that well in the client care or the instructional technique categories. So that's the biggest pattern I see, is I see people haven't prepared in all 9 categories. They're only proficient partially.
I could add to that. What I've seen over the years is, well, not honest with themselves, I guess, is one thing. Trying to, or maybe they think they're ready and they're not. I guess it's easy way to say. But I think it's them being forced into the exam too early. So it's circumstances out of their realm of control, maybe. So it's an employer, or they themselves want the certification before May for the season or whatever, and so they're there when they really shouldn't be there. And that's a lot. I saw that a lot, I guess, over the years. Is that it's not, if they just waited a little bit longer, they would have been fine, but they just had to get the certification. We've got to get it before the season, or I've got to get it because my friend's taking it. We're coming together from West Virginia or whatever. And so that's something that people need to come when they are ready to take it, not because they want to get the piece of paper trying to certificate.
It's kind of echoing a little bit what Ron said, I think, but having not examined anyone, this is a little bit of conjecture, but the times that I've shadowed and the times that I've seen people in SPI courses and in that program, it seems as though a lot of times people are so focused on one thing, whether it be the technical skills or whether it be the instruction, they don't have a mastery of the skills enough to actually put them all together, to actually bring it together and doing what they actually need to be doing, which is giving their students a really good day out climbing. They're either so focused on the lesson plan or so focused on the venue or so focused on their examiner or tying the knot that they just forget about their students entirely. And, that I think runs across a lot of different categories, is in any AMGA program, like the more prepared you can come in, the better experience you're going to be able to give. And that's not to say you won't pass necessarily if you have to really focus hard on one thing, but giving yourself a good mastery of all the skills gives you more bandwidth to actually focus on the whole, like the whole picture of the exam, rather than getting so narrowed in on one thing, or getting so fixated on one mistake that you kind of just fall apart.
I would say that those, I feel like personally you can kind of divide it into the 2 days of the assessment. I think you often see folks who show up on day one, which is largely technical skills, just demonstrating all the systems that you learned in the course and that you've practiced and that are easily repeated because you've done them many times, or in theory you could have done them many times. There are folks who fail at this hurdle because they didn't practice them many times and dial them and master them, or because they have deficient movement skills, they just can't climb to the standard when they're on-siting. But for folks who show up on day one and do well, you'll occasionally see those people fall apart on day two for those very reasons that Aziza mentioned, where they just they can't put it all together. You have to meet your client, immediately get an idea of what they're interested in and what their profile is, depending on how much information you got from the provider. You have to take them to a CRAG. Well, you have to give them equipment if they need it. You have to brief them. You have to do some risk management paperwork. You have to take them to a CRAG. You have to actually rig ropes at the site to go climbing. Then you have to entertain them throughout the climbing process and teach them skills and coach them on the stuff. And then there's downtime. Maybe they just get tired and you need to take a half-hour lunch break and have something interesting to do during that time. Or maybe you totally need to redirect and we need to go learn rappelling, or they have a bunch of technical questions out of left field, or you're working with children and we have to come up with fun games to make it interesting. And those are all part of instructing and guiding. And if you're not ready to sort of synthesize all of the skills and put them into that package, it's much harder to succeed on the second day when you have real life students, people in front of you who have desires and needs and put demands on your time and attention.
Yeah, their thoughts on assessments. I know from my experience running assessments, I'd see a lot of folks perform poorly, largely from just not being well enough prepared, not taking the time after the course to really review the skills and cement those and polish them and get a lot of time in the saddle. Beyond that, being familiar with the venue, I think it can certainly help to try to go to the place you're going to be taking the assessment and get some time in prior.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll move into the last question here. And based on hard skills versus interpersonal skills. So hard skills can be instructed, top site management, base managed, et cetera. So the question is, how, as a provider, do we help clients become more professional in regards to interpersonal skills and people skills, et cetera?
I think modeling is a huge part of it. It's really important that, I think whenever I run a course, I try to get information out ahead of time, logistics emails. I try to use things that are clearly templates. You can see, okay, cool, I got one email that showed me when I need to be, where I need to be, and what I need to have with me, and what we're going to be doing. Cool, and it's laid out in a clear format. It's something I can easily update and change for a future course to course. Trying to communicate with the candidates and the students on that course or assessment in such a way that they can pass that on and actually hopefully take concrete skills out of it, or tools, and move on. But we have a very short amount of time. I think it's definitely something that we can point you in the right direction, tell you, hopefully some of what you might need to work on. But you know, it's all of these things are contact days, points of instruction in a broader career that you're going to be developing these skills for yourself. So taking those skills seriously for yourself is, I think, the most important part. And if you do that, then it'll be pretty easy to pick up on it.
Really stemming off of what Sean just said, yeah, I agree with modeling. I just try to set an example as how I would conduct myself as a climbing professional during the course, and then really treat people on courses and assessments, you know, as I would treat anyone that's hiring me to go out for climbing instruction.
I'll add two things that this question makes me think of. One is that I think oftentimes those interpersonal skills, or the, you know, quote unquote soft skills, get deprioritized by providers or whoever it might be, or by the students. Sometimes I think they're just less important somehow. And so I think as a provider, one thing that that's helpful is just making sure that people know from the get-go that those skills are just as important as the technical skills. It's not like because one thing feels more tangible and the other doesn't means that it's somehow less important. Like, it's all a part of a complete package, and you have to be proficient in all of it to give a good instructional experience. It's not like if you can just tie knots amazingly and you're a terrible teacher that somehow you're going to succeed at this. And then the other thing I would say is, I'm going to call Derek out a little bit here, because Derek's like the research nerd in my life, at least. I feel like whenever I have a question, I just go ask Derek and he'll give me like 10 different academic articles on the topic. And one thing that helped me realize relative to this skill set is that even though it feels very like intangible and fluffy and like hard to define, there are actually like an entire body of social science research, right, that says like, here are the top 3 things you can do, or here are some like very actionable, very tangible things you can do to make a more welcoming or safe learning environment, or to make people feel more comfortable, or to give or receive feedback in really effective ways. And so, you know, I think there's something to be said for maybe just having that intuition and having that naturally. But if you don't, or if somebody's struggling with that more vague description, there are definitely like very tangible things to lean on. And that, again, that mentoring unofficial page has, I think it has a document about giving and receiving feedback that I found really helpful about just some very actionable things that you can do in it to make sure that you're more effective in those sorts of things that feel like soft skills.
I guess jumping on that, I would add to that, you know, Sean and Grant both mentioned modeling, which is really important, but I think I found that I need to intentionally take it a step farther and model the skills, but also pull back the veil. So I tend to focus on sort of 3 things. So there's not really a discrete place in the curriculum necessarily where this is addressed, but I think of, you know, a briefing or planning stage for any work day I have. I also have a debriefing or feedback for any work day I finish. And so I include my students in those processes as much as possible. So part of that is that on the first day of the program, we do some front loading and we talk about the kind of learning environment we want to have and apply some of those concrete skills that is either referenced to say, hey, this is what it means to be respectful towards one another. This is what it means to stay physically safe, and just sort of lay those terms out. Because defining those parameters of success is one way that you can help your students feel like they've succeeded. If you say success is getting to the top of the route, well, the student who didn't make it to the top of the climb is going to feel way less successful than if you said the success was to try something new. And then at the end of the day, I invite the students to join me in some feedback for ourselves and also for me. And so then that gives me feedback, if they're willing to share it, on how I'm doing and providing the instruction they need. And it also lets them see that even though I'm the provider, like, I'm not beyond their feedback. And then I can also gauge how they are at their self-feedback. And so there's some learning to be had there. That sort of says like, hey, this is how we can act towards each other. This is where we felt safe or at risk today or whatever. And then finally, I'm really intentional in trying to encourage students to coach their fellow students when they're doing exercises how they would if they're working with real students. Because if you're trying to send someone off for a call for the first time, it's helpful if you get compliance from the student, and that means maybe standing in a particular place or a certain way, and maybe you discover in this process that your language for coaching isn't very good, or that you just set up your site poorly, so while your student is standing right where they were told to stand, they're really uncomfortable in that spot, and a normal student would try to get out of that space. And so by being intentional about incorporating specific interpersonal skills into the technical systems, I found the students meet with more success. And frankly, I really only started doing that last thing because I had a student on a course who is on the autism spectrum. And so to talk about interpersonal skills is in fact needs to be a tangible, concrete thing for that individual, because he did not, just does not come by them very naturally or intuitively. And so that really made me think about, like, okay, what are the concrete things that go into interpersonal skills? And being able to help provide that to him was actually really helpful in me identifying what I think those concrete things are.
Excellent. So that concludes the questions we've got. Just in the internal chat here amongst the panel, it looks like Ron, you had a question for Adam.
I did. I wrote that earlier when we hadn't heard from Adam yet. Now we've heard from him a few times, but I'll go ahead and ask. Because Adam's experience with this program spans the breadth of Top Rope Site Manager through the creation and deployment of the SPI program. And now he sits on other shores, like looking back at it from a distance, and he can sort of, he has this great breadth of perspective. And I was just curious, what does he think of the program over time? What does he think of the major chronicles?
Who's watching though now? That's what I want to know. Who else is watching this? I mean, yeah, there's loads to talk about that. I could go on for hours. So obviously, yeah, now I'm in New Zealand, but I mean, I was back last year. I was in Kentucky. I did an SPI exam in Kentucky last year and worked a little bit for Blue Star, worked for Fox Mountain Guys, a little bit there. But I was supposed to be back there this May. I was supposed to be back next month, but now I'm not. So the Top Rope Manager program was a tough one. You know, it was well received across the country, but a lot of issues of that with the couldn't lead, so he couldn't lead to set up anchors and things like that. So that was a major problem. Going back to the original question about distance stream course and exam, that's why I moved the exam away from the course. The course used to be 5 days. It was 4-day, I think it was a 4-day course, and the exam was on the last day, which was just awful because all you wanted to do for 4 days was know what was on the exam. And so it was just awful. The whole thing was really tough to deal with, and a very high failure rate because you came on the course and then you if you weren't that good, then you failed the exam and you felt like you wasted your whole time rather than realizing you'd learned loads of skills. So the major thing was to try and remove the examination from the course, making much better outcomes, which we definitely did. As people may know, may not know, when I took over the Top Rope Manager program and basically shut it down to come up with the SPI program, working with the Europeans, the UIAA and stuff, to try and we basically said, what could we do to make the program like how's your program and what would you do to make it a better program, you know? And so that's what the SPI program was sort of like a blue sky, start from scratch sort of thing. So to be real clear to Ron's question, when I look now from looking back to when I was involved in the SPI, the Top Manager program in 2000 and 2001 to launching the SPI, 2004, I think maybe, or 5, I don't know. I think we got the SPI accreditation with the UIA in 2008, I believe. Looking at what's happening with the curriculum, the length, the assessment, the whole process, well, it hasn't changed. That's one thing I look at, right? Generally, that what I can see, it's not changed. And so that to me is the biggest achievement, knowing that we sort of nailed it then. You know, we didn't change it 2 years later. We didn't make it longer and shorter and add this and take away that and all. You know, it's from what I can see, looking at the curriculum and looking, it's just it's not being messed around with, and that tells me that we made a lot of thought and did a good job of getting it right in the first place. You know, and so that's cool. I like that a lot. That's really good to see that. But there's always things to change. Yeah, I don't know. If you want to go on a tangent, I'm not going to, but I'll say one thing. What I would love to see is more SPI representation on the board. I don't know what's on the board right now. Is there any SPI instructors on the board? That's all they are, is, you know, is SPI level, not SPI that's now a rock guide and whatever else. Are there any SPIs that are on the board of the AMGA? I don't know, are there? No. Yeah, okay, well, I'll tell you two figures right now, which I have on my other screen. So right now there's 42% of the AMGA is single pitch instructors and single and common wall instructors. 42% of the AMGA. And 3% of the AMGA are IFMGA guides. Now, how many people are IFMGA on the board right now?
Well over half.
Yeah, okay, so it'd be kind of cool, and something I proposed years ago, and something I really would be pushing is to try and get a representation of SPI on the board of directors, considering that the association is made up of, you know, 42% of the AMGA. It'd be kind of cool. I mean, otherwise, you guys, I mean, what I'd be doing is, you know, tipping some tea into Boston Harbor, you know, I'd be like, right? You know? I mean, you Americans love doing that and being cantankerous, and when you're not being represented, you know, in your government. So anyway, that's what I would suggest, is maybe some more representation on the board of directors would be kind of cool, to get some more focus of the AMGA for this sort of occasion as instructing.
Well, I would translate that into a call to action to any of your attendees, Grant, that after they pass their SPI assessments, we'd love to have them step into leadership roles for the whole organization.
What I would like to see, I'll just jump in there, make it even simpler. What I suggested to the board years ago is making positions on the board that are only for SPI. So you are an SPI to be on it. And the point of that is, it's diversity, it's representation. It's making sure that the representation on the board of directors. And so if you are not an SPI, or you know, it doesn't matter if you're an SPI years ago, you need to be in that field. You're working in that field. That's your bread and butter, is SPI or climbing wall, and that those positions should be left open for those people, so that you get guaranteed representation on the board. There you go. That's what I suggested years ago, and I still stand by that. We should do that.
Well, we're a little over 8:30, so should we wrap things up? Again, thank you all to the panelists that were here tonight. Again, really appreciate you all volunteering your time and expertise. And then thanks to the attendees. It's great to have excellent questions from everyone, and yeah, all the engagement. Said before, there's more resources out on the internet. This recording, I'll put up on the BRMG blog, so you can access it there. I'll also make it available to the providers, the panel, if they want to publish it anywhere. But yeah, certainly stay in touch, reach out, let us know if we can be of assistance in any way. With that, I'm going to end the public session, and then if the provider pool panel wants to hang around and chat, we can.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Evening.
Yeah, thanks for coming by.